market, so they know their way. And they are very much in a secure environment, with a lot of state interest and government interest in the background. They have much better access to finances, to different financial resources. And on the other side, you have private enterprises which do not have the same background, which do not have the same covering by the government or by state interests, which have to move by their own, which run a very high financial risk because they don't have so many accesses to financial resources or financial backing, being from Chinese banks or being from foreign financial institutions. So they try to move more cautiously. They now try to avoid risk, which at the same time is also not that easy. So what we had looked at so far is two things. Basically, you can say it's two things. We tried to understand a little bit more about Europe and about the foreign environment. What we also tried is to understand the Chinese environment, the different Chinese environment, and the different background. Once again, whatever we are going through, whatever we try to understand when analyzing challenges of Chinese companies getting into foreign markets, it has to be based on the fact and based on the understanding that we come from different environments. So we figure out that in the past it was not so much important. You would not so much need to worry about, so whatever, I mean, human resources. So what's got that to do with our different environments? But we look at the globalized world and a more and more globalizing world. And people say in a more and more globalizing world, it's like a small village. People come together, frontiers, they move apart, IT is very fast, internet moves ahead very quickly, so information flow is extremely fast. So it's the process of the soft side, it's the process of your culture and of your environment that at the end of the day decides whether or not you can manage those challenges. So this is what we have tried to look at so far. We still need some time to look a little bit into Chinese companies getting into Europe. So especially with a focus on the European environment and what kind of investment environment they find there. We have seen that basically and split Chinese companies moving ahead into two categories. The first category would be mainly big state-owned companies having a certain reason to go into foreign markets. And those certain reasons will be based on, traditionally again, looking for resources, making sure that there's enough supply of resources to maintain and to sustain internal growth in China. They have their own strategy, they have started off earlier, and they have a different kind of challenge they need to meet. On the other side, we talk about private companies. And this will also be the major focus on, because as a private company, you have a complete different way of how you face foreign markets, of how you come up with working against those challenges and fixing those challenges. So what is the European environment again? Let's take a look at some figures. So this again is the foreign direct investment of overseas investments of China, both looking at the direct investments of Europe with regards to China, and of course looking to China's investment with regards to overseas markets. We need that comparison because we always try to get along the line of being very closely together with what has been the Western approach and the Western challenges with regards to the Chinese market, and what now is the Chinese approach and the Chinese challenges with regards to the European market. I think it's good keeping in mind and deciding on your strategy and implementing your strategy, keeping in mind as a Chinese enterprise always, hey, wait a minute. When looking at foreign companies and they got into the market, what was their problem? So what had they looked at, even though it's different, but it helps. No? And we have seen European development requires Chinese development, and Chinese development requires Europe. So looking here in this light blue color, the light blue color shows the Chinese investment, overseas investment, and it's the direct Chinese overseas investment. So this would be the light blue color, starting from the 80s, going straight through till 2011. The dark blue color shows the overseas investment in China. So it's very simple. We look at the 80s, and the 80s clearly, there's not been that much. We know how it was, starting from early 80s, going straight through about the mid of 80s, then towards the end of the 80s. This was the time when foreign companies slowly got into the Chinese market. This was the time when special economic zones started to put up. This was the time when it was not really foreign companies getting into the market, pushing forward competition on the Chinese market. It was a learning process. It was a very stable process, and we don't see any development because the investment environment in China was very much closed and very much regulated, and there was no possibilities for foreign companies really to expand foreign investment on the market. It was bound to certain areas, especially foreign economic development zones, and the like. Of course, Chinese investment in foreign countries was almost non-existing. Now, looking at the period of the beginning of the 90s, this is how everything changed, especially from about 1993. On the one side, investment laws in China got very much liberalized. So this was the time, for example, when the segments of where foreign companies could invest enlarged. This was the time when also the ways foreign companies could get into the Chinese market changed with regards to the ownership structure. So the beginning of the 90s saw the period, and we see very clear when we look at foreign investment in China, we can see that starting from about 90 to 93, a big push came to foreign investment in China. And this was, of course, mainly based on liberalizing the environment for foreign investment on the Chinese market. Now, what can we see from the Chinese development? So we see that from the period where really liberalization for foreign companies started to take off on the Chinese market took about 10 years. So it took 1 decade of a learning process for China. So we see here quite a very stable development of foreign investment picking up, of a change in the investment climate in China, with a lot of changing regulations, a lot of adapting new laws, a lot of finding out for China which way to go when it comes to economic development and enterprise management. For China, this very period was a learning process. So this basically investment on overseas markets has been very low and very stable. And investment here represented in light blue of China in overseas markets was very much focused on just state-owned enterprise investment. Looking at foreign markets as finding ways to improve partnership relationship with foreign enterprises, and especially making sure to get into the first